Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome everyone to our committee as we pursue our study on mental health challenges in the agriculture community. With us this morning, we have from the Canadian Hort Council, Rebecca Lee. Welcome, Rebecca, again. Thank you for being here with us today, the Chief Executive Director. And also we have Beth Connery, Chair of the Labour Committee. Welcome, Beth, to our committee. And also from the Canadian Sheep Federation, Ms. Jennifer McTavish, General Manager. Welcome to our committee, Ms. McTavish. We'll start with a 6-minute opening statement. We're going to have a system of cards, just like the soccer players. And this means 1 minute, and this means 30 seconds. Just to give you a heads up, because we're kind of tight on time, so we're going to try and keep it on track. Okay, do you want to start, Ms. McTavish, for 6 minutes? Yeah. Thank you.
I'm actually here this morning on behalf of the Ontario sheep farmers, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk about farmer mental health. Ontario sheep farmers represents 3,000 farmers who contribute over $465 million to Ontario's economy. Ontario is home to the country's largest sheep flock, and we process over 50% of all the sheep and lambs born in Canada. And together with our partners, Alberta and Quebec, we have formed the National Sheep Network, which leverages the provincial resources we have to work collaboratively on topics of mutual interest. Perhaps more importantly, though, I am here today as someone who has worked for and with farmers for almost 17 years and is growing increasingly concerned about their mental health. While much of my career has focused on promoting agriculture and business risk management, and when it comes to livestock, that often means animal health, farmer mental health was never top of mind. A few years ago, I took a mental health first aid course that was offered by the Canadian Mental Health Association. Sitting in a room full of first responders and social workers, I found myself thinking about the farmers in Wellington County who at that time were dealing with an outbreak of avian influenza. Prior to taking the course, I had been reading accounts from farmers who had spoken of the social isolation that comes from having an infected flock. And one account that stays with me was a farmer's painful recollection of no one wanting to sit beside his family in church. Leaving that course, I recalled the times that farmers had called me, distressed about how low lamb prices were, or frustrated of the new regulations that were coming into effect, or the time a farmer sat across the table from me and tearfully recounted how a coyote maimed his daughter's 4-H lamb. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd done enough for them. Did I offer them enough support? Or had I been sighing in frustration because there was nothing I could do about low lamb prices? Or perhaps I was trying to get off the phone as quickly as possible so I could get on with my real work. I started to talk to anyone who would listen about my concerns around farmer mental health, and to be honest, at the time, the audience was small. It is heartening to see that since then the audience has grown and the agricultural community has come together around this issue. And, thankfully, Dr. Andrea Jones-Bitton at the University of Guelph not only listened to me, but grabbed hold and threw herself into researching farmer mental health. Her research has been instrumental in not only encouraging a dialogue around farmer mental health, but also shaping the way that we understand it. We know that farming is a high-risk industry that requires an incredible capacity to deal with volatility and uncertainty. Over the course of this last year alone, Canadian farmers have endured drought, porcine epidemic diarrhea, and the financial impacts of the negotiation and subsequent signing of NAFTA 2.0, although I know technically it's the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. While we can acknowledge that all these examples may impact a farmer's business, it's not often that the conversation delves into how these challenges are both out of the farmer's control and have the capacity to impact their mental health, which in turn impacts their productivity and farm viability. Add to this that as farms grow larger, farmers are becoming more physically isolated, and they are growing increasingly socially isolated as the public understands less and less about farming, and in some cases are vilifying agriculture as a whole and farmers as individuals. Historically, farmers have been dealing with these burdens quietly and stoically on their own. We need to change this. A failure to address farmer mental health poses a serious threat to the sustainability and viability of Canadian agriculture. Dr. Jones-Bitton's research confirms that farmers face high stress anxiety, depression. They're also reporting low levels of resilience and are at high risk of burnout. In addition, there have been many media reports citing that farming is one of the most stressful occupations worldwide, and in the U.S., death by suicide is higher amongst farmers than any other occupation. What is not widely understood are the impacts poor mental health have on low resilience have on farming. Based on research about the impacts of mental health in other occupations, we can surmise that poor mental health in farming threatens farm productivity, is a barrier to growth and innovation, and may contribute to the ongoing attrition of farmers. As a representative of the livestock industry, I cannot ignore the fact that a farmer's mental health most likely impacts their ability to provide adequate care for their animals. While I appreciate that we cannot eliminate all the stresses of farming, we need to support our farmers so that they not only survive, but that they thrive. We also need to make sure that programs and support for farmers are designed by farmers. One cannot simply adapt programs designed for the general population. They will fail in the agricultural context. For example, recommending vacations or spending more time in nature does not resonate well with farmers, nor is it really applicable in a farming context. And I've gotten the sign, so I'm going to skip down to my last paragraph. It is difficult to reconcile how we will be able to have a sustainable food system in Canada if we do not have healthy farmers. Canadian farmers are telling us their mental health is a serious issue, and they are demonstrating that they need help, and this needs to be addressed. It is time for us to step up and start taking better care of the people who are feeding us.
And now for the Canadian Hort Council, I don't know who wants to start.
Yeah, I'll start, then we'll switch
Sure.
over.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much for having us here. Good morning, everybody. We are very pleased to provide input into your study on mental health challenges in agriculture. The Canadian Horticultural Council is an Ottawa-based voluntary not-for-profit national association that represents fruit and vegetable growers across Canada involved in the production of more than 120 different types of crops, with farm cash receipts of $5.4 billion in 2017. This is the foundation for an estimated produce value chain of nearly $14 billion of real GDP and 181,600 Canadian jobs. For almost a century, CHC has advocated issues that impact Canada's horticultural sector. We promote healthy, safe, and sustainable food while we ensure the continued success and growth of our industry.
To achieve such growth and success requires affirmative support and the existence of business conditions that will motivate farmers to continue with their lifestyle. My name is Beth Connery. I'm chair of the Canadian Horticultural Council's Labour Committee, and I would like to share with you some of the experience that I know. These people operate under incredible stressors. Financial pressures, labour shortages, reduced competitiveness, and weather challenges are all being faced on a daily basis. Labour in particular is an ongoing issue for horticultural producers. We rely heavily on the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program to provide needed employees for planting, harvesting, and packing our produce. This past year, many employers had difficulty sourcing their employees in a timely fashion. This meant that there were crops not sown or transplanted and other crops that were ready out in the field with no one to harvest them. We work with very thin margins, and starting a crop year with a loss makes it very hard to work long hours for the rest of the year in the hopes of covering that loss and making even a marginal profit. Farmers, like most people, have a variety of coping mechanisms and reactions to stress, anxiety, and depression. They run the gamut from keeping busy at anything to avoidance and procrastination. Many tasks are done alone, increasing a sense of isolation. Even those who have dealt with depression in the past can be caught unaware by this insidious disease. This past spring and summer saw drought-like conditions in Manitoba. A friend thought that they were dealing with the stress fairly well, talking with friends, exercising, practicing self-care, all the usual recommendations they had learned when dealing with depression previously. Then came the first significant rainfall of the season, and they realized that a load had been lifted off their shoulders. The smiles came more readily, and they felt better. Farming organizations are becoming more concerned with the mental health issues their members are facing, and most, if not all, are providing links to resources in their communications. Social media campaigns are actively promoting the information and resources. The Do More Agriculture Foundation has been formed, and the University of Guelph is developing resources as a result of the mental health survey many of us participated in. As a farming family, we are very cognizant of the pressures and results of anxiety and depression. In June of 2012, we became suicide loss survivors when my husband died of depression. His brother and business partner had died of a heart attack 6 months previously, and he was under increased pressure to do both jobs. We had dealt with his depression before, but the added pressure was finally too much for my husband. In my opinion, these people are not choosing to leave their families, nor are they avoiding the problems they are facing. They are choosing to end the pain they are living with. This is not something I can understand because I have never had the feelings they obviously do, but we are left to pick up the pieces and move forward as best we can. We have had many family and one-on-one conversations about the importance of mental health. We have had access and used counselors on various occasions, both as a family and individually. One of us has called the rural helpline to talk when they needed it. It was considered to be a positive experience because they felt forward motion when counseling sessions were set up for them. The downfall of some of these systems is the lack of familiarity with the farming community when you finally see a counselor. For most farmers, farmer is what they are. It is not what they do, and the distinction can be very important when dealing with emotions and a new path forward. There are immense pressures on farm families today, and we want to rise to the challenge. But we need help in dealing with the issues that are within the control of regulators. Things like weather, we have no control over. Personally, right now, it's been raining in Manitoba, finally, for the last month. But that means that I have $1 million worth of carrots sitting out in the field and no way to get them in. That is going to crater anybody's business plan. Government needs to enable us, not hobble us. We are proud to produce safe and nutritious food for our families and consumers to eat. We believe we are good stewards of our lands and plan to pass our farm businesses down to succeeding generations as they were passed on to us. But the current pressures can make us look at our children and wonder if we really want to put them through what we are experiencing. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I would welcome any questions or follow-up.
Thank you very much, Ms. Connery. We will now start with our question. I want to welcome Mr. Lloyd and Mr. Motts also on our committee today in replacement, and I think we have Mr. Tabara and my colleague on Fisheries and Ocean, Colin Fraser, here with us today. So welcome all of you, including the rest of our regular members. We'll start with Mr. Dreeshen for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to all of our witnesses today. Thank you for being here. And Ms. Connery, certainly our hearts do go out to understanding just how difficult it is to be in that type of a situation. And then, of course, it does fall to people such as yourself to then carry on and the difficulties that are there. One of the things that you had mentioned was that government needs to enable us, not hobble us. And I think that's a critical aspect of it, because I don't think we look at it from the three levels of government and the things that happen. I mean, we're talking about federal issues here because we have some capacity to be able to help in that regard. But we have, there are provincial regulations with labor standards, that type of thing that you have to deal with. Even municipally, there's acreage owners that are coming in, and they wonder why it is that every once in a while it's going to smell because manure is put on the land, and why it's dusty, and the odd time you should be shutting it down so they can get some sleep. These are things that also that we never had to worry about. I wonder, Ms. Connery, if you could speak to the labor side of it and whether there are issues there. I know that in Alberta we're at a stage now where they're talking about if there's a certain number of people that they have the right to unionize, and there's just no relationship to the investment and that one has in the operation versus those people that will come and go on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we understand the security of person and so on, and why there has to be safety. But are those issues that you feel are creeping into your industry as well?
In vegetable and fruit growing and many of the other horticulture industries, labor is an incredibly key issue. We cannot operate without enough labor. We cannot get enough labor from the Canadian market, and that is why many of us use the SOP or the Ag Stream from the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. Without those people, we cannot operate. It comes down to that. And it appears as if the system becomes more complicated as we go along. Certainly, 25 years ago, the paperwork was not nearly at this level. We have no objection to playing within the rules and to there being clear and defined rules, but we need to have access to those people. On our farm, we have about 56 foreign workers that come in during the year. They start in May when we start our crops, which is asparagus. So we actually have a 6-month harvest period. For those of you who know how busy harvest is, ours is for 6 months. And we have those guys, mostly we have guys, stay for the full length of our term right through to the end of September into October, depending on when we're done our broccoli and carrots, which I hope we'll finish sometime. Without those people, we can't operate. And it is the true for almost all horticulture operations. It's a necessity. I know that people think that we should be able to find workers here, or people who come up should be able to have a pathway to permanent residence. That is something that we would be happy with for some of our employees, but we do not have work for them for the other 4 or 6 months of the year. So how is the Canadian population going to support them for that time?
And I think when we talk about that, I know that I have people that are involved in the business that you are, and it really comes to a case of saying, well, all of these other stressors, we're going to have to go and buy a $250,000 piece of machinery to take out 5 or 6 people that would be working on the line because we just can't afford it. And the other thing, of course, is sadly, not so much with the foreign workers that come in, but other workers, if they're supposed to be there at a certain day, well, maybe you're getting a phone call saying they're not coming, maybe you're not. I mean, these are the other issues, and how do you run a business that way? Perhaps, Ms. McTavish, one of the things you had mentioned is the vilification of the industry, the attacks that come from vested interests, I suggest, but those that are simply trying to well, whatever it is, that they end up doing damage to the farms. Could you just explain that in the short time that I have left?
Sure. So there's a couple of different examples. One is specifically when we were dealing with ruminant agriculture. People think that, grazing cows and sheep are ruining the environment. And they'll say that we don't want to be grazing animals anymore. And really, when we're grazing pasture land, we're renewing soil health. We provide habitats for pollinators and birds. But there's always, I shouldn't say that so emphatically, there's oftentimes these very black and white stances, right? We shouldn't eat meat. We shouldn't be raising animals. We shouldn't be grazing animals. And for people who are farming livestock, that can be very hard for them to hear sometimes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. And now, Monsieur Drouin pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'd like to ask Ms. McTavish and maybe CHC as well, just in terms of the way you're bringing that conversation of mental health to your membership, and is that conversation happening? And I know in Ontario, for instance, the Ontario Federation of Agriculture has started to have those discussions. But as you know, unless there's a major issue, sometimes attendance can be somewhat sparse. Unless there's a major issue, people show up. If there's not a major issue, attendance is usually at a lower level. So how do you communicate that message, and what have you been doing in terms of providing that message to farmers to say, hey, it's okay to reach out?
In our context around the sheep table, it's a bit different. I have 4 board members who have dealt with suicide since January. So whether that's another a farmer that they know or somebody within their small community that's committed suicide. So around our board table, the discussion is perhaps a bit different than discussions around other board tables. I'm also really stubborn and just talk about what I think needs to get talked about, which is mental health. I am really concerned about them. And I'm very lucky that around, with the sheep farmers in particular in Ontario, they have really been opening up and creating an environment where it's okay for them to call me up and let me know what's going on. And I've learned from some of the courses I've been taking to challenge myself when I start to feel afraid not to ask, how are you doing? And force myself to just ask the question and then be willing to sit there and listen to them, and just creating that environment for them to be comfortable doing that.
Great. Do you want to jump in?
Sure. The CHC itself has a publication that they call Fresh News, Fresh Thinking, and that actually is one of our topics this year, this fall in our issue. I also find that almost every commodity has got it on their communications list this year. And most of us are very tuned in to Twitter and Facebook and all those kinds of things, and it's all over the place. I think also with the advent of having more women on boards, there is more ability to have those conversations and to keep them going. And very often, it doesn't matter what the meeting is about. If you're having a group meeting, people are tucking that on as an item so that it gets repeated and repeated as they go along.
From our previous witness on Tuesday, there was a social worker who was a previous farmer, but she actually goes out to directly on farms just to sort of do a health check. How are you? How are you doing? Is there anything that do you need help? And is that something that you guys are working on as well, or would push for a program like this within your provinces?
I would think programming like that would be helpful. We haven't started pushing for anything like that yet, although certainly we have a good relationship with our Ag department and some of the other departments where you could ask for that. And as always, it comes down to a case of resources, so you're balancing what they're going to deal with what we need.
Great. One of the issues that we're trying to come up with, and recommendations that we're trying to come up with, is fighting that stigma amongst mental health, and it's is it ever present within the farming community, but it's also present within the general population. But Ms. Connery, you've touched on an important point. Often when you go to your doctor, they will prescribe you what they prescribe to the general population, as opposed to having a customized kit for farmers, let's say. So, is there if there was a few recommendations that you would propose to this committee in terms, and understanding that healthcare delivery is provincial, but is there something that the Canadian Mental Health Association could be doing better to target farmers, for instance?
I think perhaps making sure that those who are in contact with farmers actually have the farming background, so they understand the time pressures, the constraints, the isolation. Making sure that people are talking. I know certainly 6 years ago at my husband's funeral, we stated what happened, and that started a conversation in our community, rather than hiding what happened. He died of mysterious causes. No. So it starts a conversation, particularly for us, it was in our age group. But certainly it was able to carry down into the younger generations as well, to talk about the fact that mental health is important. You have to take care of yourself. You have to talk to other people. But trying to get that message is very hard to do. But certainly having the ag background would make things more effective, because when you finally do get to counseling and you get suggestions that just are not practical on a farm, where you cannot implement them, go on a holiday. Well, I can't do that, for 8 months of the year. I could plan for one in 10 months, but that's not helping me right now. So having that understanding, finding different ways to cope, creating avenues for people to talk, I think would be a very good way to start.
I just wanted to add in there that I think this is where Dr. Jones-Bitten's work really comes in handy. She's been doing a lot of participatory research with farmers and is advocating for a center of research, a central hub in Guelph, where we can talk to farmers and make sure that the programming that's designed for them works for them. I would also recommend that I think anybody who works with farmers day to day, whether you're an industry association person or a feed rep or a manufacturer or a banker, that you take a mental health first aid course so that you can recognize the signs of somebody in distress, so that you can make yourself feel comfortable to ask them how are things going, and so that you know where the resources are.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. McTavish, I'll start with you. We had a conversation before committee, just talking about our love of sheep. I have a very tiny flock, but they are an amazing animal. My flock, the wool, I actually had it spun and knitted into a couch and sweater. I'm from Vancouver Island, so I had Couch and Tribes knit me a sweater. But animal husbandry, there are a lot of misconceptions out there about the critical role that they play, not only on the farm but in our economy. And I know in some cases the concerns out there are justified. However, I don't think, as you said, that there's a really clear understanding just how animals are raised. I mean, it is in the farmer's best interest to make sure that their animals are healthy. This is the source of their income. I'm interested in how we go forward. Rather than having the two sides talk at each other, in what ways can we have a conversation where it's a respectful dialogue, where we start fomenting the value of farmers, and do you have any suggestions on that?
So there's a couple of pretty creative things that we can do. For instance, one of the research projects we're looking into right now is working with conservation groups, groups that are interested in grassland habitat, and working with them so that they understand from an urban perspective the importance of grazing livestock and what they bring to the role. We're also dealing, in the sheep industry specifically, we're dealing with knitters and weavers, because the sheep provide a biodegradable, renewable clothing source. You can also insulate homes with wool and mop up oil spills with wool. So we have a different story to tell when it comes to sheep. But I think we have to start by enabling our farmers to feel more comfortable to tell their stories, and they're our frontline environmentalists, right? They're the first ones. They told me before anybody else did that the butterfly populations were dropping. So we need to make them comfortable telling their story, and we need to find groups that we can start working on sort of one-on-one to build those relationships with. I think that would be my recommendation. Thank
you. Ms. Connery, Ms. Lee, we've had a conversation before about the labor troubles. And I know this is an ongoing issue. I speak to the farmers in my region, and yes, absolutely, if they could hire local people, they would, but no one is stepping up to the plate to take those jobs, so they often have to rely on seasonal temporary foreign workers. And so, in the context of this study, there are a lot of variables that farmers can't control. You mentioned the weather, but there are some that we can, and I think the labor one is one of them. So I'm just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail. Are there any specific recommendations you want this committee to make with respect to the seasonal worker program so that we can help alleviate the mental health stresses that many people in your profession face?
We have had an ag labor roundtable this year that's been working hard on this issue, actually. And I think from our perspective, one of the government's issues, and they are working at breaking it down, is the different silos that people appear to be in that deal with our program. So we go through various departments, ESDC, IRCC, and things have to be handed off from one side to the other. Sometimes there is not enough communication on what's going on there. New things come up. This year there's biometrics. It's going to be a new issue for us that ESDC did not find out until about spring, so they couldn't start letting IRCC know the implications of the change. So we're going to have to be dealing with that this year. So communication between departments would certainly help. From a farmer's perspective, one of the things that we would like to see would be some clarity on where we are in the process. We send in our applications, and then we sit and wait. And we don't know how far things have moved along, whether they have or whether they haven't. And having some kind of a tracking system to know when the LMIA has been approved, whether the information has been sent down to the sending country, whether that information has been forwarded onto IRCC, and if they've received it, so that we know things are in progress, or if they've stalled somewhere and we can ask questions or answer questions that need to be answered so that things can proceed. Those kinds of things would certainly help us and give us a much better time frame and a frame of mind, because many of us were sitting there last spring wondering when we were going to have people show up, and sitting there with crops in the field and losing those crops. It was very difficult.
I can remember one of my summer jobs as a teenager was working at a blueberry farm. And you know, in the month of July, you have that couple of weeks window where if you wait too long, they're done. And so I can only imagine the stress when you're seeing your life's work out there on the field and it's not coming in. So very much taken. I only have a few seconds left, so I'll yield my time. Thank you, Chair.
You've got 15 seconds.
That's all right.
Thanks, Mr. McGregor. And now, Mr. Piscitello for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Witnesses, thank you for coming here today. I'd like to follow up on Earl or Mr. Dreeshen's point. He made two good points, I think. One, your comment on enabling us, not coddling us. And the second thing on, there's just not one area. There's the federal government, there's the provincial government, local organizations that deal with the challenges that you farmers have. Can you elaborate a little bit on how we can deal with these challenges? And number two, what's working there? What do you think that as a society, not as a federal government, but as a society, that we could focus on that is actually a good thing?
For us, one of the things that we're working on at the Canadian Hort Council and through ESDC is coming up with a national housing standard for the employees that we're bringing in through SOP and through some of the other programs. But the difficulty is every province and municipality has a different standard. So how do you find one that is common to everyone across the country that enables you to create a national standard? Certainly, I know I believe in Ontario, it's the health departments that are sending those standards. In Manitoba, it's the Office of the Fire Commissioner, so fire extinguishers and that kind of stuff are very important. Depending on where you are, there's very different standards. So trying to create a national standard is very difficult. Communication across all levels of government is critical for us, but to try and ask all of the municipalities in the country to get on board with one particular thing would be very difficult. So just continuing with ongoing communication is crucial for us.
Two phrases today at committee that we don't hear, unfortunately, a lot at committee. Husbandry, that Mr. McGregor brought up, and stewards of the land. And I commend you for what you do, because if it wasn't for farmers, we wouldn't have anything to eat, we wouldn't have our quality of life. And it's a shame that there is this disconnect between the vast majority of urban, suburban folks and the farming industry. Talking about husbandry and being stewards of the land, are there any bigger changes that we can make in the industry that could be helpful in dealing with the mental health challenges of farmers?
I think communication for us is one way to do it, and having a common platform to communicate could potentially help. I know certainly one of the stressors that we have is the difference between what public perception of a farm is and the reality of what a farm is, and how we treat our animals, our land, our water supplies, and all of the resources that we use including the people that we have as employees, because those are very important to us as well. They are all resources that we consider we need to husband and steward. They are not simply things to be used up, because our goal is to have a succession plan, to have a way for the future, for our families, and for the people who want to move into the industry. Far too many people are leaving simply because they cannot deal with the stresses anymore.
Yeah, I'll follow up, or would anyone else, Ms. Lee, or like to comment?
Go ahead, Rebecca. Yeah, you go ahead.
Just briefly, one aspect that certainly as the group that represents horticultural farmers across the country, we would, from the government aspect, we would really appreciate outward communication on your part about the importance of agriculture. It's only, 3% of the population at best, even with all the outside industry. So obviously it's not as heavily weighed in the public perception, in the media, in government activities as a whole. But it's fundamental. I mean, if you ate today, you have to, as they say, you have to thank a farmer. And just for us to know that government has our backs on this would be wonderful. That would be a very big step forward, and that's communications again.
I have nothing to add. That was really eloquent, Rebecca. That was really, yeah.
Ms. Connery, you mentioned the lack of familiarity about farming within the mental health community. How can we change that?
Well, that is a very good question. There needs to be, whether it's someone who has come from the farm or whether it is simply another set of parameters and courses that counselors need to deal with or take or learn. They need to actually go out and meet farmers and go for a tour. Farmers are very happy to have someone come out and see what's going on their farms. And they can show you what's happening. They can tell you what their time is spent at, how much time it takes to do different things, how much time they're in isolation. We spend in horticulture a lot of time with other people in our industry and with people on our farms. But there are also a lot of jobs where you just go out on a tractor and you go up and down the field for hours and hours during the day, or you are out in a field doing another job, and you are isolated. And what you do when you're sitting in that tractor is a lot of thinking. And if you are in a good frame of mind, that can be a very good thing. But if you are not, you can find yourself trapped, rethinking really bad lines of thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Connery. Thank you, Mr. Pechissolido. Et maintenant, Madame Nassif pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to our witnesses for their presentations. You all spoke about the challenges and problems associated with mental health. I'd like to know whether you can be more specific and talk to us not only about mental health problems, but also specific problems for mental health in livestock raising and in horticulture. Ms. McTavish, could you start, please? Yes, that's right. If there are any different mental health challenges between the livestock sector and the horticultural sector.
The mental health challenges would be shared. They both have to deal with weather challenges. There are a lot of things out of their control. When we're talking about sheep specifically, it's a commodity-based pricing system, so you have no control over your pricing. You have no control over your input costs, and you're trying to negotiate with Mother Nature, and she doesn't cooperate very well. So I think there's a lot of shared stressors between the different commodities.
Madame
I would say too, that there are a lot of shared stressors. They're in our industry as well. If you go to the grocery store, you have no idea that we're not growing broccoli in Canada in February. It's always there. All of those crops are there, and the Canadian public really doesn't have a concept of the seasonality of our crops and how industrious we have to be during the time period that they're there. There are also crops that we grow that we store during the winter and we pack out all winter as well. So buying Canadian stuff and taking that message out is a good one. But if we're talking about specific stressors and the reactions of people, I don't sleep well right now with all that crop out in the field, which means that when you are short on sleep, you are not possibly dealing with other people in as kind a way as you would hope you would be. You try to catch yourself as best you can. You may not make the best decisions on the moment because you are tired and overextended. Those kinds of things happen on an ongoing basis for a lot of growers. So it's very difficult when you don't get to, when you are dictated your input prices. You have to buy them. We operate on a worldwide market for many of our crops. So we're not dictating price as well. We are taking the price as best we can negotiate in the marketplace. And we are trying to find that thin margin in between where we are going to make a profit, where we are going to make a profit that will enable us to move forward into the future. Certainly all of the decisions that we take on a daily basis, in my case, affects the lives and livelihood of 80 families. That is a pressure. These are all pressures that we are under on an ongoing basis.
Une autre question.
Another question. In your associations, where do you get the funding for mental health initiatives, generally speaking?
We've taken money out of our research funding to support Dr. Jones-Bitten's work, and we are providing a lot of in-kind time to help her build her central hub at the University of Guelph. But in the beginning, I'll be honest, it was hard to find the funding because farmers like to put research dollars into researching production and cost-effective ways of increasing production while maintaining their level of productivity. Or that was kind of redundant, I apologize. But the long and short of it is, it's hard for us to find funding.
Madame Connery?
And the same is also true for us. We do not have a line item that says mental health. It is something that we deal with through our Labour Committee and volunteer basis that we talk with people and try and make sure that it's an item that is out there in front of our members to make sure that they're thinking about themselves and trying to do self-care and to be aware.
Comment vous fonctionnez s'il n'y a pas de financement?
So how do you function without funding?
Great difficulty. With great difficulty. Yeah.
Question liée aux femmes.
A question about women. Could you tell us whether women's participation in agriculture is changing? Is their way of dealing with stress changing, be it on the farm or in the association? So how many women are involved in agriculture, and is their way of dealing with stress changing?
I work with an 11-person board, and 4 of our board members are women under the age of 45. We did a Mastered Shepherd's course for farmers who'd been farming sheep between 3 and 9 years, and 60% of the participants in that course were women. And by far, it's changing the way that we are functioning as a board. Sorry, I've been wrapped up. Sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. No,
I got the card.
So, merci, Madame Nassif. So this is unfortunately all the time we have. We have a shortened committee this morning, but we certainly appreciate Ms. McTavish. I really appreciate you talking about the maybe getting some training for some of the people that go on the farm. I thought that was a neat idea. Not to become psychologists, but at least to be able to engage conversation on that subject. And Ms. Connery, please accept all our condolences for your loss and also for being here with us today. And Ms. Lee, again, for your organization, all the hard work you do. So thank you for being here, and we shall break quickly and get the next panel. Thank you. get back to our seats and we will start the second hour.
You can suspend.
Huh?
Just suspend.
We'll just suspend for now. Try it again. Okay, thank you. So we'll get underway with our second hour. J'aimerais souhaiter la bienvenue.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Marcel Acou, the Executive Director of the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association.
Marianne Doré, a team leader, online services. Welcome to both of you to our study on mental health for farmers, Canadian farmers. And we will start with a 6-minute opening statement. Mr. Acou, est-ce que vous êtes prêt? Do you want to? Okay, good.
So first of all, I'd like to thank the committee for allowing me to speak here today. Just to give a bit of background of who Marcel Acou is, I'm starting to feel long in the tooth now. I was a hog farmer till 2004, so I've experienced all the ups and downs in the industry. I also was involved with Keystone Ag producers in 1996 during the flood, and they had tasked me to work with some of the groups there. So I've had some personal one-on-one experience with stressors in agriculture, both in terms of how it impacts people and how it impacts myself and my family. I'm currently the Executive Director of the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, and really what does CASA do? Our vision is to have a Canada where no one is hurt farming, and our mission is to make agriculture a safe and healthy environment to work and live in by helping producers and community partners to see and manage risk. So the mission is very much acknowledging that farmers work and live in the environment, work and live in the same place, and then also agriculture is more than just the producers. There's the community around them and all the people they interact with. So CASA has been around for a while, and when I first came on in 2004, we actually commissioned a survey that was one of the first ones out there. And at that time, it was a stress survey just to try and understand what the levels were, who farmers would turn to in times of stress, and the primary causes. And in the notes, I actually have the link to it. And at that time, 1 in 5 described themselves as very stressed, and half said they were somewhat stressed. And it mirrors almost what Dr. Bitten-Jones has reported. And in 2004, the primary causes were poor harvests and production, government policies, and farm finances. So 14 years later, I think those three are still pretty well at the top of the list. And then the farmers preferred to meet one-on-one as opposed to group sessions or telephone help. So that was, and then in 2006, La Coop Fédérée actually had a survey amongst their members, and they had 50% of the ag producers had a high level of stress. So again, very similar. And the highest levels were for pork producers at 66, 48 for dairy, and 36 for poultry. And that's in comparison to 20% of Quebecers that felt stress in general. So very definitely the ag population was fearing higher levels of stress in 2006. In just last year, we commissioned a study just to see what types of insurance, because employees often have access to employee assistance programs where they can access specialists and stuff, and we thought, well, wouldn't that be nice if farmers had the same level of support through some type of the insurance plans? And we found that most farmers have access, if they want to the health portion, but where there's a real deficiency is in terms of proper disability coverage, and then almost non-existent mental health ability to access mental health insurance. So having said all that, what has changed? So from 2004 to 2018, I think we've always known that farmers, it's different than other industries. Most farmers see it as a vocation, long hours, unpredictable weather, crop. But they've always believed that the general public acknowledged and respected the industry, and I think that has changed. So the farmers feel scrutinized and attacked by the public, in essence devaluing the profession. One of the things that's come up and we always talk about those bad apples, and we see sometimes in the news where there are husbandry issues where farmers are mistreating their animals. And I think Dr. Andrea Jones-Bitton will probably make a link there, because often it's stress related, and I think as an industry, and I may be guilty of this too, often we say it's just a bad apple when we should be saying this farmer needs help. Where are we helping him through this time? Because the symptom is what everybody sees, but I think the underlying cause was probably he needed help. What's changed? Farmers today seem to be much more willing to talk about stressors and discuss the impact of those stressors on their mental health compared to 15 years ago. And that's why I'm pleased to be here today. So in 2005, we actually made some recommendations to the Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology regarding mental health. And as a result of that, the Mental Health Commission of Canada was formed. And the first mandate is focused on how best to help people who are homeless and living with mental health problems. I guess I would suggest that there might be room to expand that mandate so they could actually focus a little bit on rural, remote, and farmers. One thing we would like to see is the development of a national strategy that would focus on farmer and rancher mental health, so we could coordinate resources and share and know what's happening across Canada. Support for a national stress and suicide prevention service. We used to talk about just a stress line, but I think if we had a service. And then mental health research support. Trying to get research linking mental health and wellness to human health, safety, and animal welfare outcomes. And there's some technicalities in there with ICD-10 codes that could be mandated so that we could actually track some of those easier. And then evidence-based mental health resources tailored to meet the need of farmers, both in terms of content and delivery. So I think the government of Canada has a critical role in supporting farmers and ranchers with their messaging. Because I often hear the messaging, we're going to be exporting. Farmers, grow so much XXX, and it's very seldom do you hear that we value the work that farmers, their families, and their workers do every day.
Thank you, Mr. Echo. Sorry, we're out of time. Madame Marianne Doré for 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Marianne Doré, and I'm a 7th-generation dairy farmer, originally from Brampton, just outside Toronto. Because of urban encroachment, my family, my husband and I moved to New Dundee in 2010, where we moved the cows and joined a partnership with my brother and my parents. I met my husband when I was in high school, and he lived in Montreal, and he had never seen a cow before we started dating. I wrote an article with my husband about our story with his anxiety and depression in 2017. That was the first time that we spoke publicly about it. Looking back now, we're better educated on mental health, and we can see a lot of early signs and symptoms that we were not equipped to notice or discuss at the time. Things that cause me stress are animal health, working with family, as that can be the best and worst part of my job, trying to find my time for my daughter when we work from 5 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., trying to find time for ourselves as we keep waiting for things to slow down and have a hard time scheduling time for ourselves, financial stress, changes in the market, social media attacks on our industry, the weather are all things out of my control but affect me directly. All of these things also affect my husband, but he also has a history of mental health problems in his family, divorced parents when he was young. He moved around a lot and had a lot of financial stress on him as a young person, and he did not grow up in agriculture, so he has a steep learning curve. All of these additional pressures put effect on his resilience and in ways that we did not understand until after we went through a crisis. After our article was put online on the Ag Women's Network's website, we had so many people approach us with their own stories of their own struggles, and this led us to being invited to speak on a panel with Andrea Bitton-Jones about mental health. After that, we have joined her working group, which is a workshop of different farmers and industry people and mental health workers to work on her program. I've been blown away by the amount of people who are willing to talk about this once taboo subject and the thirst that there is in this industry to finally do something about it. I'm here today on behalf of the Ag Women's Network, which is a 5-year-old volunteer-run program that I've been involved with for the last 4 years. The group is mostly online with topics including mental health, industry advancement, personal development, unconscious bias, balancing work and family, rural daycare, producer profiles, and we're starting our 2nd year with a mentorship program. Our motto is cultivating and connecting leaders for a strong agricultural sector. We have a website with blogs. Our online closed Facebook group has over 2,200 members, and our open group for men and women have over 2,400 members. Anytime the topic of mental health comes up, we are blown away by the positive outpouring of support. It's something that has touched everyone's lives. From all of our conversations with AWN, conversations with Andrea Bitton-Jones' working group through the University of Guelph, and conversations with industry friends and strangers alike, there's a strong need for a farmer-specific mental health outreach program. Farmers need something specific for farmers to feel comfortable reaching out. Needing to be understood is so important when you finally make that big step to contact someone when you're in crisis. There's a strong desire for a national resource that all members of agriculture and their support network can easily access. Having one national resource would avoid duplication and maximize resources. It needs to be simple, and it needs to be readily accessible if you have any hope of people knowing about it and feeling comfortable using the service. A national service would need to be open to everyone involved in agriculture and their support networks as well. Following closely behind the need to help people in crisis is the need to support their support person. I speak from experience, and I have heard many personal stories of support people feeling overwhelmed and emotionally exhausted from trying to shield that person in crisis from anything that would further upset them. And in a farm setting, that means taking on more work and more duties around the farm and family to relieve that person in crisis from more stress. It's exhausting, especially when you are stressed yourself. My hope with the national service is that it would become so commonplace and available, like telehealth is, that they would feel comfortable reaching out before they're in crisis, and their support network can use those resources as well. Farming is often a solitary job, and it could be a nutritionist or a veterinarian that would be your first point of contact to discuss your mental health. They need to know what to do. Groups like 4-H Canada would benefit from teaching leaders the signs and symptoms of mental health crises, and training industry sales teams and veterinarians would go a long way to share information and increase awareness to those in need. The industry needs to have knowledge of the signs and symptoms of a person struggling and the next steps that they should take to link that person to the resources that they need. A steady, content agricultural worker is much more efficient and motivated to stay in the industry, and we as a country cannot afford to lose those people who are willing to put in the time and the hours needed. The time has come for us to address mental health as a health concern. Everyone knows someone who has cancer and wouldn't dream of belittling them for reaching out for help, counseling, and or medicine. The same needs to be said for mental health. Thank you so much for your interest in agriculture, mental health. This is a topic very dear to my heart.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dore. Now, Mr. Motz for 6 minutes. Oh, Mr. Lloyd, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for coming today, and I'm always interested to hear stories. I represent a very agricultural intensive riding, and I had some cousins who were in the dairy industry, and unfortunately we only have a couple hog operations left outside of Edmonton. But my first question is, you said there's a lot of things you can't control. You can't control the weather, prices. There's a lot of volatility in the industry. But at this committee today, and in our capacity as federal members of parliament, we do have some things that we can control. And one area I'd like to focus on my questions on is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the problems that sometimes arise with CFIA that creates unnecessary stress for our farmers. And I think of some particular cases in my area regarding sometimes negligent activity by CFIA. So do you believe, and I guess I'll direct this to Mr. Hocquot, should the CFIA be able to use the fact that crop insurance has been paid out as a shield from any remediation for their negligence?
I'm going to have to decline to answer that because I've been out of the industry so long, and I'm sure if you talk to Canada Pork Council or those, they'd be able to answer it. I apologize.
No problem. Do you have any experience or stories about dealing with CFIA and how any recommendations on how you think that they can be better to improve the mental health of farmers?
I won't have recommendations with CFIA, but I do know when I was a hog farmer, and all the programs that are out there that were supposed to help me weather the financial storms. That was a tough one for me because The programs weren't bankable, and I don't think that's changed. And it would have been a lot easier for me at the time if I would have known those programs were bankable and able to approach my lender and saying, look, we know this is coming. It's going to take its sweet time, but we know it's coming. And I know that would have helped me way back when. I imagine it's very similar today still. And with respect to CFIA, I'm sorry, I can't.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Madame Doré, would you have any insight on that from your perspective?
I would say that it's often a scary time when you're involved with the Food Inspection Agency or the SPCA or someone like that coming in, is meaning that there's someone found fault in you or someone from the public has falsely accused you of something. So it's a scary time. But I think that we all need to step back and realize that we're all on the same page and that we have the same intent as all of the CFIA workers, that we all want the same thing. So I think just communication and not vilifying each other, that we do want the same things, and just communication to share that we're all on the same page.
Recently, a judge ruled that the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, has a duty of care to taxpayers. Do you believe that it would be a positive thing for farmers' mental health if we were to legislate that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency also has a duty of care to farmers?
For sure. I think that it's helpful for everyone to sort of have a mandate of care is always a positive thing. So. Excellent.
And I guess, one thing, especially with yourself, Madame Doré, the importance of family, like family farms, and we're seeing a lot of tax changes with estate planning and things like that. Would you say, and a previous witness had said, their husband was dealing with depression and died of depression because a brother passed away 6 months earlier, and it just seems to me, having family here in the farm industry myself, the importance of having, your children, your grandchildren, brothers and sisters involved with the operation, that seems to help a lot in some cases with, mental health on the farm. And can you comment on what you think maybe some of the positive and then maybe some of the negatives of the family farm model are on the mental health of farmers?
I'd say that it's very helpful as long as you have a helpful family, that there's lots of I'd say one of the biggest topics that come up that's needed to be said alongside mental health is succession planning, and that it is because there's so many different models of farm businesses, whether they're joint venture or incorporated, that there's lots of different tax implications of those kinds of things. But yeah, I think it's good to have family around because you have someone else watching and knows you to notice that you're acting differently. So I think that it's helpful that way, but because you can't leave your family, you can't avoid them sometimes when you're.
Absolutely. And I guess, could you comment, some recent changes to succession planning due to changes with the state and tax law? Has that been in your experience, and Mr. Jacob, feel free to pipe in here as well, on the stress of farmers, the mental health of farmers over the past year or so?
That'd be hard to say because I haven't completed my succession plan on our own farm, but I know that it causes some concerns for sure for people, but I'm not sure. I couldn't speak if it was a positive or negative.
My dad just passed away, and I was executor, and we were trying to go through the estate, and he thought he had planned it really well in forming a corporation, etc. I can tell you need a pretty high-priced accountant to help you navigate all that and understand exactly what your options are. It's not easy. Yeah, but
did the recent tax changes, have an effect on that in that?
Oh, very definitely. It was a heated discussion within our family is exactly how we were going to maintain that fairness. I guess it's not equal, but it has to be fair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Now, Mr. Pesci-Solido for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Madame Doré, Monsieur Jacob, thank you for your presentations, and I must say it was very thorough. You brought up many, many points, and I'd like to maybe highlight a few of them. Mr. Jacob, you started by talking about the different degrees of mental health challenges in the various industries, hogs, poultry, dairy. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe explain why you believe there are the differences and what, as a federal government and as a society, we can do to be helpful?
it's an interesting question in terms of and I think I was listening to the previous transcripts, and I think that same question was asked whether supply managed commodities seem to have less stress than open market commodities. And I think when I was farming, I had hogs, and my neighbors all had supply management, and I don't know if we were less stressed or not. I know we had to deal with a lot more, because I was a hog farmer, I had much more volatility in my pricing. But there are some pretty good years also that my supply management neighbors didn't have. But I would say, as a general rule, I think supply management offers a bit of a, if you're a top performer, offers a bit of income stability that the other more open markets wouldn't have. That's one of the stressors, is always price volatility. So I guess I would assume that would have less stress. Part of the challenges, I think, is that if you're looking to grow the farm, it's much more difficult within a supply managed industry than it is with another industry, where if you've got the capital and the business plan, you just make it happen. So yeah, so I can't really answer your question as well as I would like to.
Mr. Hoko, you answered that very well. Along the same lines, Madame Doré, you talked about one of the issues on stress for farmers was the health of animals. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes. As a fact that we talk about often is that no matter how good your day starts, the second like a down cow is a cow that is either sick or has fallen and hurt themselves, and nothing instantly deflates the group like a down cow. On Monday, for example, I came off a weekend off, and we came in at 5 in the morning, and a cow that my brother had thought was getting better had passed away overnight. And then we're like, oh, that's awful. Okay, move on. Then my brother and husband go into the barn to get the cows ready for me to milk. And then one of my dad's favorite cows had fallen and was stuck, and we needed to lift her and put her into the thing. So that was two big things in the first 10 minutes in the morning. And it's really hard. Like we're building a new barn, and it's all very exciting, and like things are going well, but it's just sort of deflates. And so we're very proud and base a lot of our success on the success of our animals, and we take it very personally that we've let them down when we have them hurt. And that's also why we get so upset about social media attacks. Like I've recently just gotten off of Twitter. I'll talk of NAFTA and things. I needed to step away from the Twitter world because we weren't accomplishing anything arguing about it online. So I think that while we need to have a dialogue with the people who aren't from farms, that it's a lot of responsibility for me on top of all of the other things that I do, that I have to be an advocate, that they call, for defending myself, and that's very tiring.
You also talked about the importance of 4-H clubs. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so 4-H is something that I've been involved with my whole life, and my brother and my dad are still members, and it's a great organization to teach kids confidence and public speaking and all a variety of topics. And I think that it's a great way to fit mental health into all of the subjects because they can just add it into the dialogue. And youth suicides is also a very scary topic. And if you can just teach kids more about acceptance and understanding their emotions in a very social aspect, I think that's another great way to reach people at a young age.
Mr. Oko, at the beginning you talked a little bit about the interaction of farmers, the one-on-one versus the group setting. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
I think when we had asked farmers if they were to go out and get help, how would they like to see it? And very definitely it was one-on-one. They felt that at that time anyways, that was the preferred method, and I think that still remains, whether it's one-on-one remotely, but that they have a caseworker, that they understand agriculture, and that they know kind of what they're going through. If I could, just to go back a bit on some of the previous comments, is I think what might be missing also is when there's animal husbandry issues and we get the SPCAs or CFIAs in, it might be nice to have somebody in your corner, especially if you're suffering from mental health stress, an advocate for you just to help manage those people. Because generally, if there's an issue with animal husbandry, I don't think it's done on purpose. It's done because there's underlying factors, and to have an advocate in your corner would be great.
That's fine. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peschelito, and now Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hako, I'll start with you. I think your organization, it's very good to have you here as a witness. Your goal of limiting or reducing accidents on the farm down to zero. I was just wondering if you could, put into the record for us the link between mental health and accidents. I mean, I know like farming accidents can be very brutal and they can lead to mental trauma later on. But also, if a farmer's mental health isn't really at 100%, can this lead to more accidents? We've seen the link between their mental health and productivity. Is there anything you just want to add with relation to that specific topic?
Anecdotally, we say there's a link between mental health and injuries, but I don't think there's actually research proving it. So it'd be nice to have some research to actually see how close the link is, and then also what the causal factors are, so if you were to do some interventions, you would know when to do it. So although we say when you're tired, you're more likely to make a mistake, I think, and I know they've shown if you work long hours, you're equivalent to being impaired. So we know that there are some impairment issues with lack of sleep, and if you're impaired, you're more likely to get hurt. But to have some actual research that might demonstrate some of the links and even capture the data related to fatalities by suicide would be interesting. So we could develop proactive mechanisms to prevent that.
Mm-hmm. And you've heard Dr. Bitton-Jones' testimony before this committee. She had 3 recommendations supporting a Canadian network for farmer mental health, federal funding stream for farmer mental health research, and support evidence-based training programs for agriculture. So those are something you can definitely get behind. Yeah.
And we're lucky enough to, in the past, have had part of our funding from agriculture and agri-food. And within our proposal that's currently going through the steps, we've actually proposed to, and after having talked to Do More Ag and Dr. Bitton-Jones, to see if we could develop some resources for young families in agriculture, because Do More Ag is doing probably the more general, and Andrea is doing some other stuff. And we thought, a bit like you're saying, a young family who's struggling between multi-generational conflicts, sometimes in the home, young children, enormous debt load, trying to get everything going. If there's anything, a break in the link or an added stressor like a child that maybe needs some extra support, there's nothing really there right now. And if it's there, they have to run to the city, might be 4 hours away. So really the solutions are not there. So we're looking at developing some resources for those young families in agriculture.
Thank you. Ms. Dore, you come from a supply-managed farming operation, 7th generation, I believe you said. And I've toured dairy farms within my own riding, and it's been a fantastic experience. And I think one of the strengths of our supply-managed system is every farmer has said there's a level of certainty. They know generally what their income is going to be, and that allows them to make some long-term planning. And some of the capital investments they've made in their operations, I mean, they are very slick. It's quite amazing. And they've opened their farms up to the public so we can all see how it runs, and it's really quite enlightening. However, when you've talked about some of the stressors that exist for farmers, but when you look at, in the context of some of the trade agreements that we've recently signed, CETA, CPTPP, and now the USMCA, so supply managed farmers have been constantly told that the government's there to support supply management, but every time we're hiving off a certain percentage, and so you're losing that kind of certainty. I'm just wondering, because we've heard from witnesses on Tuesday on this subject, how does that relate to mental health? What does that do to your level of certainty within the industry?
Very stressful. So I'd say that I decided with my husband that if this trade agreement resulted in the loss of supply management, I was going to exit the industry. That I was not interested in working that hard for consumers that didn't care to support us. So I was ready to leave. and that's the reason I found supply management industry so attractive to join, that that there's a stabilization and we can make investments, and there's always a joke that bankers really like dairy farmers and chicken farmers because they know that I can pay that loan back. So my pig farmer friend complains about us because he cannot get as big a loan as I could for the same project because the banks understand that I have a steady paycheck. And so sometimes it's not as big as his paychecks, but it's the same. And I really like the attraction of one steady thing in all of the other crazy crops. Like we do a lot of crops as well. And it's nice to have that, the support of a supply management. But I am still glad it's there, but I feel like as an industry, every time we grow, we give that percentage away with every trade agreement. So while I can't blame this government for their trade deal, because that was sort of an impossible situation to be put in, so I don't begrudge that, but at the same time it's very disheartening to have all of your advancements given away.
I mean, the percentages seem small, but they represent thousands of people. Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you, Mr. McGregor. Maintenant, Monsieur Drouin, for 6 minutes.
Mr. Drouin, 6 minutes.
Was not a frequent comer, but he's here for this topic. Ms. Doré, in your opening statements, you've mentioned that we need to equip the 4-H's of this world and the other ag groups with better tools to reach out to farmers. Is that correct? And what would you see? How would you do that?
Well, as an example, we have one of our sales, like a sales guy who sells fencing and dairy equipment. Joe and I and my husband were at a panel speaking at a farm trade show, and the sales guy came up to us and he said that it's very interesting that this is becoming more mainstay as a conversation. And he said in the last year that farmers have really been talking about this, he's had 8 farmers approach him to talk about their struggles. And he's like, I don't know if I'm the only person that they've ever talked to about that. And he's like, I don't really know where to send them. Like, I don't feel confident with my knowledge to then get them to a counselor or a doctor. And so that's a lot of pressure to put on people. And I know that we've talked to our veterinarian about this a lot, and veterinarians also struggle with mental health pressures. And they're often the one that are there and on your worst day when you're dealing with sick animals. And I think that being able to train everyone in the industry to notice changes in people. Like when my husband was in crisis, you're looking back and he didn't want to go to trade shows that he used to go to, and he didn't want to go to meetings that he usually went to, and all of these signs of things that were very subtle, and you're just like, well, he's just kind of grumpy, and he's always kind of grumpy sometimes, and well, it's fine. But then looking back, you're like, oh, that's a thing. And so a couple months ago, I didn't want to go to a meeting, and I didn't want to do this, and I was kind of sullen and didn't want to do things, and I was like, you know what, this is what's going on with me. And then I was able to sort of check myself and try to improve situations. So I think with all of this extra knowledge and training people to look out and notice when someone's not cleaning, like if you walk into a barn and it's not as clean as it usually is, that's like an easy way to say, no, like, how are you really? And start those conversations and then know what to do with the answer once you get an answer.
And I assume, I know, talking to a doctor in psychology, who's advising major companies, she says, we're developing peer systems, essentially training staff within companies to be those identifiers of mental health and be that link towards that extra help. And would you see something similar like this within the farming community? Or?
Yeah, for sure. That people feel comfortable. Like, this is a very bearing your soul conversations. And so if it's someone more familiar to you, then that would be helpful. But it's also nice to have a phone call or someone else that you could call to talk to if you didn't want to complain to your neighbor or your family member. So it's nice to have options of people to talk to. And I think that we've discussed before about having that counselor on the phone have an ag background is very helpful. And so my husband there's a long way to talk to counselors and psychiatrists, and he was able to do it with via conference. And so he would go to the doctor's office and then talk to someone in a teleconference. So he was in a room by himself, so I wasn't eavesdropping in the next room, and all of these things where he could really be open and talk to someone in a tight schedule where they didn't have to, they could see more clients in a short period of time. And so I think that's an interesting way to go, and especially with people being so remote.
Great, thank you. I'll pass it on to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here, for testifying. As the member mentioned, I'm not on this committee, but it's a very interesting topic that we're talking about. I'm reading this article here from the Huffington Post, and I'm just going to quote part of the article. If you've idealized farming as an easy occupation, it's not. Farming is characterized by high stress. You live your profession 24/7. Financial pressures, livestock disease, poor harvest, climate change can devastate farmers. So we've heard a lot of previous testimonies from other witnesses. Would you agree with this article that this is a field where maybe we're not realizing we know that there are the stressors and the pressures on farmers, but are we not tackling the issue directly? Are we only addressing just the symptoms?
I'd say a bit of both. That it's important to, like, I don't think that other than a labor standard to making it easier to get temporary workers to reduce the hours. Like my husband and I always talk about, we need to figure out a way. Like there's 5 of us on the farm. Like there should be a way to not work 16-hour days every day. Like we don't need everyone there all the time. And so why don't we schedule, like I do morning until 2, and then that's a normal work day. Like I should be done my day at 1 o'clock, but that doesn't happen. I stay until 6:30. So we should be able to shift work. But then whenever you have crops and things like that to work on, that's hard to schedule time. So if there was a labor market of specially skilled temporary workers, like there's a young man in our community that is like the go-to person. Like I don't really know where he works, but he works everywhere. Like he helps this guy and helps us and helps, like he's just the perfect person to have in our community, and we really enjoy having that sort of flexibility of, oh, like I'm really busy this afternoon, let's just call Carson, but it's hard to find that skilled workers with that flexibility.
Thank you, Madame Doré. Thank you, Mr. Tamara. And Eva, we have about 5 minutes left. So.
For me?
Yes.
Okay. Qu'est-ce que vous posez?
What would you ask our government to do? What do you recommend that we do with regard to funding strategies, awareness, regarding assistance with mental health problems among farmers? I had already made recommendations in my speech. I would say that the government's role, even in support programs and risk management programs, is to make sure they are as solid as possible. The more tangible and solid they are for farmers, and the more they assist farmers with income fluctuations, the more helpful they are. Of course, there are always changes, and then you need to renegotiate with bankers. We also need to enhance the value of farming. Farmers aren't just producers of products for exports to help Canada. We are working families who look after their animals, look after the environment, make sure that food is healthy. And they help all of Canada. All of Canada needs farmers to eat. Do you believe there are challenges specifically associated with livestock husbandry? Are there more challenges associated with horticulture? Which is more difficult? probably the most difficult challenge is disease. Because if there's disease, you might have to slaughter your entire herd or flock. In crops, you don't get that kind of disease, but with hogs or dairy herds or livestock herds, you may have to slaughter the entire herd. That doesn't happen with grain. Ms. Doré, do you believe that women in agriculture are helpful in making it easier to deal with mental health challenges?
As a generality, we are better about discussing our emotions than men are. But I think that as a society moving forward, it's becoming an easier thing to talk about. And whenever I first talked to my dad about sort of mental health being on the rise, and he's like, yes, no one had mental health struggles when I was younger, but a lot of people were alcoholics. And so it's just sort of, it's becoming more aware of what the problem is rather than, and having a name for it rather than just sort of glossing over it and being like, oh, well, he didn't commit suicide, it was a farm accident. You're like, no, well, it was a suicide. So I think that just the conversations are changing, and having more voices at the table is always more welcome. And I find that women have always been involved in agriculture, but it's only, again, recently that people are taking the credit for the name farmer rather than being a farm wife. And I think that that's a very important change for people to take that position.
Avez-vous des données?
Do you have data? Data on women's participation in the field?
That more and more young people are becoming interested in it, and like there's a rise in women in STEM, and we are part of that. So I think that it's becoming more and more accessible, and people are becoming more comfortable joining boards.
Oui, vous pouvez ajouter quelque chose, monsieur.
Credit Canada may have some of those numbers. I do recall seeing, the changing demographic of farmers, and they were showing that more women were actively engaged and involved in farming, but I can't tell you exactly what the numbers are.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hako and Madame Nassif. This is unfortunately all the time we have. Thank you so much for being here with us today to give your testimony. It's going to be very well received, and it'll be part of our report. Thank you so much. And we will suspend and then come back in camera to do our business part of the meeting.